Hello and welcome to the Wolf Den podcast. This week we will be discussing blockers and just the overall meta shift of BT7. Uh, as again, I am your host Naco, joined by my co-host Sanitsu. Um, why don't you go ahead and start us off this week, Sanitsu, and I guess really break down what you wanted to go over.
Yeah, so I have been doing obviously a lot of deck building and a lot of deck testing and doing just general research on BT7 as a whole, doing my due diligence. But realized I started using blockers a lot less, and I was looking at other people and they also started using blockers a lot less. Like, I'm talking about your just classic 4-drop blocker that has either Evo for 1 5000 DP or Evo for 2 and 6000 DP. Like a lot of those cards just seem to be disappearing from the meta, even though a lot of decks, even hybrid based decks, don't run a full heavy stacked level 4 package because there's always a little bit of room open for them to like customize and change up things.
Yeah, that's true. Um, I know we had talked about this before in private, but so Um, I really think that just a lot of this has to do with just overall, like the not really, I guess, the game getting faster, but the game getting more um, archetype focused, I guess, would be a better way to describe it. Only because um, even looking back as like as soon as BT5, um, you see a lot of decks running generic cards, either like efficient for their cost or efficient for their stats or efficient for their value, like what role they fill in the deck. And you're just seeing less of that now. And I think even you pointed out that a lot of the decks nowadays are running more like inline blockers. I guess like if they're running blockers at all, it's blockers they get for free without sacrificing specific slots for them.
Yeah, because I noticed that starting to happen again, like you said, in BT5. I was playing a ancient Garurumon deck, and I basically played it like Garurumon Tribal because that was just the thing to do at the time. Because we had the promo Lobo to warp into the ancient on top of all of the Garurumon synergy in case I wanted to digivolve all the way up that way, and I could do some nutty things with that stack. But the problem I ran into was blockers just were eating up unnecessary deck space that I needed for more synergistic, more inline cards. And I was having more success without the blockers and going a more aggressive style approach, even though my deck could also be played in various different ways, and sometimes it's not even an aggro deck, depending on what you're playing. But yeah, it was just something I started to realize that a lot of these blockers and tempo value cards, they're just filler for what the deck was lacking before.
Yeah, I think it's a little unfortunate because while it made sometimes the decks a little too generic, especially like in the case of like moving from BT4 to BT5, the like from Yellow War Grey to Yellow Lord Nightmon, the deck didn't change like a whole lot. Obviously, you just kind of like removed some pieces and slotted in the Lord Nightmon package, and the deck kind of built itself. But at the same time, I feel like we're almost like more restricted in deck building options now with the inclusion of like the inline blockers. Like I guess the easiest example for me and the one that I picked up on was the Doru line from BT6, the introduction to the X antibody for black, and they don't run blockers because Dorugamon is a blocker, provided that at least you have an X antibody underneath it or next to it. So basically, Dorugamon, if it's ever on the board, is always a blocker in the X antibody deck.
Yeah, and I noticed this with Diaboromon as well. Again, not trying to pick on black, they just have the most types of stuff that do that because they have the most different archetypes. But I digress, and even something like Diaboromon also doesn't really run any blockers because the new level 6 that they got from the Classic Collection is their blocker to make all of their Diaboromon tokens blockers. So, like, a lot of decks, if they are going to be running or adopting blockers, it's just something that naturally works within their package, or either that they just don't have the tools needed in order to flesh out what they're trying to do, and it's just going to end up being a filler card for them to use just because, well, it's probably their best option given the ladder.
Yeah. Well, it's not even too bad that you pick on black because while it's not an exclusive keyword, like blocker is like a true archetype of black, and it still remains like it continues to get support even moving forward. I believe like if not the BT9 uh black Digitama actually supports the black arc like or black blocker deck. Like if you wanted to play black blockers, like it continues to get support, like each set, small amounts of support, but it's support nonetheless. So I guess what I found with the biggest problem with blockers is kind of my same problem with like memory blockers slash um like the like versatile rookies that different decks run. Like the can't reduce costs, can't gain memory, etc. Of
Yeah, in my videos, I just call them the anti-meta card because that's basically what
yeah,
it
like
is. You're
yeah,
only
like the
running
hate
it to be
cards.
anti. Yeah, you're running it to be anti-meta.
Well, those they share the same problem of that like I have very rarely found situations where like a 5k blocker was even chump blocking was the difference between like me winning or losing.
Yeah, because like also the other shift to like push blockers out in a sense. Like blockers are still a thing, and depending on your deck, you could actually run certain blockers. But like the other big thing that I started to notice is the increased amounts of removal, especially removal on level 4 and below Digimon. Not saying level 4 and below Digimon are bad. Obviously, we still need them and we could still use them in some very powerful ways. But the fact that we have more ways for a lot of boss monsters to just ignore the traditional blocker that we have been using just also makes them really bad. So it's just like, oh, if they're just going to get around my blocker anyway, why am I running this blocker?
Yeah. Like I said, it's basically the same problem I found. Like because yeah, lower level Digimon are just so much easier to remove. Like generally, like like beyond each color, each color has its own method of removing. Like blue will bounce them, red will either just destroy them outright or pierce through them. Um,
Or
Jesus,
even punish them from blocking to begin with.
true. Like purple destroys them too. Like there's just different. They all have their own solutions to blockers that like I feel like blockers are almost like in like the general like sense of like place in the game, like there's just almost an antiquated concept at this point. Like the game has kind of moved past the point where like a blocker is a requirement anymore or even so much really like a consideration.
Right, and shifting gears back towards like the inline blockers, like you're only running it because again, it's already in your line. It just naturally fits within your game plan, and that's what makes those types of blockers start to excel versus just, oh, I'm gonna run Grizzlymon because it's Grizzlymon. I don't have anything else better. When at this point in time, we are seeing decks evolve more than just straight out replace each other. So obviously, we're still in a phase where decks are going to be replacing each other, but we're getting to a saturation point where they have a lot of cores and a lot of foundations already made because we're already working with six past, well, technically seven past sets. Um, and now that we have all of these foundations, they're starting to build upon it. That's why we get sets like BT9 and Classic Collection, where it's just trying to build upon what we already have.
Yeah. Um yeah, the inline blockers I feel like are almost like a band-aid. Like it doesn't solve the problem that blockers suck. It just lets you play them without sacrificing specific deck slots for them.
I mean, yeah. And something we probably, I mean, we don't have a whole lot to experiment with, but something we could try to experiment with is blockers on various other levels. So I know in Jesmon, technically their blocker is on a level 3 body, but we could do more with our level 3 bodies now that we have more Sistermons to be playing around with. And the same goes with various other decks, where it's just like in green, we could play Cherrymon as a level 7 blocker, not only just because it's tempo efficient to Digivolve, but because now it's something the opponent might not be expecting or be able to deal with, depending on the type of deck that they're playing. Because now they don't have a removal card for it because their removal might be a little bit level specific. So there's still room to play with what blockers can do. It's just uh, up to us to decide where blockers actually fit.
Yeah. I'd actually I'd argue that
Oh,
Cherrymon
not level 7, level 5, my bad.
I'd actually argue that it's 7 to DP. Oh, that's probably why you get confused. But I'd argue that Cherrymon's a bad example. I think Cherrymon is um the of the older line of thinking. I think we need to move more towards newer like style blockers, like you said with like so Sister Mont Blanc is a really good example of like an inline blocker because it is like a level 4 is already pretty much chump blocking. So why does it really matter whether it's a level 4 or level 3? It doesn't matter at that point. And Sister Mont Blanc specifically solves the problem of it's a blocker that solves one of the fundamental problems of blockers is that like it's sometimes like a net loss of um, tempo because like if your opponent swings with their level 6 and you block it, you just lose a body and they lose an attack and but it's usually just not enough to warrant just destroying your own Digimon in many decks. But Sistermon Blanc is due to it being a Sistermon in the Jesmon deck is recursive. So you can block with it and then the next time you swing with your Jesmon, you can just pull it back and potentially block again. Um,
Right, and we see decks also trying to tech in Mechanorimon just
mhm,
as a card to just be that anti-meta card because it's another blocker that's just very easy for a lot of decks to adopt just because you just play it for 4 and then it just stops anything that's weaker than it. So we've seen this in BT6 and Classic where a lot of the aggro decks will just tech 2 or one of them in just to try to stop the other aggro deck that they're going to be going up against just because that's what the format was. So like there's still room for what we could do with blockers, but I do think like we need alternative ways to rethink how blockers are going to be approached in the future, or at least I hope Bandai is.
yeah. Yeah, like Mechanorimon is a really good example too of like because it plays cheap, something that neither the one cost Evo blockers do. I guess the 6K blockers that Evo for 2 play for 5, which isn't the worst, but playing for 4, still being a 6K body, and it having that ability to restand itself, I think really puts Mechanorimon. It almost I feel like Mechanorimon should potentially be like the template for like the next wave of blockers. Like I feel like we should almost like errata blocker in a sense by just producing new blockers that have that same blanket text of like this Digimon cannot attack, but it restands when it blocks something. Because I think that's the biggest problem is that even if you're playing up against something like a Gabu Bond that's trying to rush you down, or like a true blue rookie rush, like having a blocking once isn't super great in a lot of times, in a lot of situations. Rookie rushes they go so fast that without the specifically Mechanorimon to stop that early aggression, that low to the ground push, it almost doesn't matter. Like, okay, cool, my Unimon blocked one attack. Maybe, provided they don't have like Spiral Masquerade or something.
Yeah, like that definitely is kind of true because like a lot of these aggro decks either can get around blockers just because they could place more bodies than you could block, just because your blockers are finite while their attackers are not.
Hmm.
So like that definitely is a kind of negative side effect to those traditional blockers, and maybe we'll see a change in how blockers are going to be approached in the future, especially now that BT10 is going to be up on the horizon. We have Ragnar Lordmon coming out, and him before was a kind of blocker esque deck because his whole gimmick was I am the ultimate sword and the ultimate shield. So he's going to have some probably interesting blocker tech. I don't know if that deck is going to be a red or black deck. It's probably going to be both.
It'll probably be both, yeah.
But still, like there's definitely a lot of room for blockers, and it's not just limited to black. Even though black, yes, probably has the best use of blockers because one of their hybrids is a blocker. You have Craniumon, which adds protection to your blockers. You could even make Digimon blockers that weren't before. So like there's still just a lot that they can do with it for various other colors and really support what blockers can mean and do for the game as a whole. Just because we do see this shift towards decks being faster and defense changing as a result of the lack of blockers.
Yeah. I guess um just the idea that like the blockers don't like they live in a weird middle ground where like they also don't they don't stop like the true aggro decks, the ones that like they're really fast because you're only blocking the one attack, and then they don't do anything to like the taller decks, I guess, because by the time that they're swinging, like very few decks, if any, swing with level fives, like unless it's a very specific level five in a very specific situation, and not expect it to die, I guess. Like there are decks that swing with lower level Digimon that don't care if they die. So, or if any, like especially in the case of purple, want them to die. Um, like, the idea that like a blocker, like I think it was just like when the game first was like being designed, they needed a way to stop like people from attacking you, but without it being like the Yu-Gi-Oh problem of like you need an empty board to attack security, or the Magic problem of my opponent gets to choose whether I let them hit me or not. Because like basically both solve the combat system without like having anything be labeled blocker, because everything is a blocker, so nothing is a blocker.
Right. And I think like Digimon, the way it's designed, still has lots of room for changing up how blockers work as a whole. Like obviously they have the keyword blocker and that's how blockers work, but they could adopt from their bigger brother, Chrono Clash, and do something like adding Sentinel as a keyword where it's effectively blocker, but your card is already going to be suspended. So like it's almost reverse blocker in a way. Um, so I think maybe like there's different ways that they could approach defense
Hmm.
um in Digimon like form. Because right now the defense that we have is mostly coming from security threats or literally just the fear of crackback, where it's just like, oh, if I hit their security, a tamer might come out, or a Gaia Force might come out, or even a security Digimon might come out. And yes, Shademon is a security Digimon that's also a blocker, but again, very few decks want to run it because it's also a traditional blocker in a sense.
Yeah. Um. Yeah, that's a good point because like the biggest problem of it being is that like not only is this Digimon a blocker and therefore you have to like not use it on your turn. Like I guess that's like the bigger problem of blocker, not just that it blocks once per turn and like taps itself to do so, but like the idea that it because I guess that's something that Magic doesn't deal with because Magic opponents declare all attacks at once, and then you in response can declare all blockers and double block and stuff like that. But um, I think the real key point here that is probably negatively affecting blockers isn't necessarily just security. It's that there's only one like combat stat in Digimon, as opposed to either of the other card games where there's two.
Well, there's a lot of other card games that do have just one combat stat, but again, they handle combat completely differently and they use various other things to kind of alleviate how combat is handled
Hmm.
as a whole.
Yeah.
But like focusing on what we have with Digimon here, like we still have different ways that we could tackle the not necessarily blocker problem, but how we perform different defensive options.
Hmm. So, um, an interesting point though is that um, the Yellow Lord Nightmon list I've seen floating around, at least like for most people's templates for BT7 include like a large amount of blockers, mostly because that list is just trying to be very like memory efficient, and the one cost blockers are.
Yeah, and like I think this goes back to like the point where it's just like there's not a lot of good inheritables that Lord Nightmon cares about. So if you're going to be running a vanilla card for the most part anyway, you might as well just make it a blocker just to sit on the field for the upside. And because Lord Nightmon's also playing level 3s, you could digivolve them into blockers to at least attempt to stop the attacks.
Yeah. Um.
So like there is merit to why Lord Nightmon plays blockers. But yeah, like one of like as you said before, one of the big problems with blockers is they're somewhat hard to use and you don't want to use them to push the game forward. You're just trying to use them to stall the game out. And I feel like mechanics like Boutmon and Reboot kind of help give blockers a little bit of an extra edge just because, well, now we have alternative ways to figure out how to use our blockers.
Yeah.
Not
I
only just for blocking, but for aggressing as well.
I was actually really excited for that combination when I saw it, but I don't know if I've said it on the podcast before yet, but like after the initial playtesting, I found that I was like making less efficient plays as far as like advancing my game state by trying to force like the Bulkmon, Boutmon, Lord Nightmon stack, and I've actually gone as far. I've cut Boutmon down and replaced it with more Angelwomons. The just to like actually just win faster.
Yeah, and I think like that's also a sentiment to why blockers are taking a huge hit in terms of like their usage and popularity is because they don't generally win games anymore. Like you can't say, "Oh, I lost because you had a blocker." Most of the time, you're almost never saying that. So it's like usually a better idea to figure out an alternative way to push your game plan and game state forward to get you into a more advantageous winning position. And again, blockers don't really accomplish that goal. And this is kind of why hybrid meta is like taking such a huge rise, isn't necessarily because of the giant influx in hybrids, but because hybrids were just that good to begin with. Like all the way back in BTO4, we've memed on like Bushi for game or hybrid for game, and that sentiment is still true with hybrids where it's just like, oh, here's a tamer, here's my hybrid, you just lose the game.
Yeah. So I just pulled it up. Like maybe it's like a design decision, or if it's just like catching up to the rest of the game. But like yellow doesn't have a lot of inheritables. Period. Like it's so weird.
No, they really don't. And like that's kind of both a strength and a weakness because like yellow can do some absolutely disgustingly stupid things. But at the cost of not having inheritables is usually that trade-off and they're focused more about on playabilities because well, they're a high synergy color that just wants to play lots of bodies and get lots of value off of playing said bodies most of the time for free.
Yeah. Yeah. Like a lot of these do have like actually on play effects. I'm looking at like the level fours in general because I was like, what would I run as opposed to blockers? And there are like four or five that have inheritables, period, and fewer that have relevant inheritables. Like like BT4 Growlmon has the inheritable of if you have three or fewer security cards, this Digimon gets plus 1000 DP. Whoop de fucking do.
Yeah, and that's kind of why like Lord Nightmon just completely ignores those types of cards in general because it just doesn't need it. It's like what's plus 1000 when you play a body and get plus 1000?
Yeah,
Like it's just extra redundancy that you don't really need.
yeah. Wizardmon
And
probably being the only, or Wizardmon being the only like good one prior to, I guess the addition of Bulkmon now, because I did mess around with like the um Lord Knight, like I guess it really wasn't Lord, it was like Masty Dynasmon kind of thing, with like the idea that like I can burn a security, recover it back with Dynasmon, procking inheritables, like it was an interesting deck, but it wasn't very good.
it's yeah, like it's kind of hard to tell what's good until you actually start playing and practicing with it. Like that just goes with basic playtesting. But also another trend that I noticed is they've also just been printing less blockers as a whole. Like I
Mhm.
noticed this because I do a pre-release guide since they started doing pre-releases. And I noticed a very, very common trend where there's just not a lot of blockers in each set, period. Like BT5 and BT4 probably had the most amount of blockers, but that's just because we had the wave of the one Evo blockers
Mhm.
on our level 4s. Then after that, with like BT6 and BT7, each set had like one playable blocker out of the whole set,
Yeah.
and that was it. And it was only playable in context of a pre-release. You're not gonna just run a Grumble or not is it Grumblemon? No, Grumblemon's the other one.
Yeah.
You're not gonna run a Gigasmon just because like he's a level 4 blocker. Like that's just not exactly what you're gonna be doing. Um because
Mhm.
there's better blockers that you could be running in that slot. So they've just also been printing less and less blockers as well.
Yeah. Like I honestly don't think we're gonna see. Well, I don't have to speculate. I can just look. But um, the next blockers that I think we see of any meaningful value are the dual colored blockers in BT9.
Um, I would argue against that and say we do get Magnamon in BT8.
So
He
I,
is
I
also a
general
blocker.
general applicability, I'd say. Like so the next um what the
More
hell
generic use, yeah.
what was I gonna like because they're called something uh cycles. They're called cycles. That's what Magic uses. Like
I would
like
still say that word works.
so like yeah so like they're referencing something without having to use a specific. So like we say like the one cost blockers. There's one for every color. We don't have to name them specifically. Like the next cycle is the dual colored blockers in BT9. Obviously there are like individual, spatterings of blockers throughout. Magnamon being the one for the, Vmon armor deck. Um, I'm flipping through. Uh, Black War Greymon in BT8 gets the inheritable, giving blocker from the Black Greymon. Like there are blockers, but the next cycle is actually not until BT9 with the dual colored ones.
I didn't even notice that. I should have. Um,
I really liked it too because um we're really stretching here. Like we haven't really done anything looking into Japanese plays at all, but the BT9 blockers, at least the next cycle. It's not complete yet. Just like I know when the blockers came out in the other prior sets, they didn't come all at once. They like filtered in until everyone got one. But um, these blockers Evo for 2, so they're still level 4. They Evo for 2, on play for 5, and they cost 6. So the same as the first cycle of blockers, except they, because they're dual colors, when attacking, it costs 3 memory. Basically, that's the slight penalty for having them be a dual colored blocker, is that they cost 3 memory when attacking instead of 2. So they're not strictly better than the mono-colored 6K blockers.
I mean, I would say they are because they are two colors on a level 4 slot, which is extremely dangerous in my perspective, but that's for a completely different reason aside. Just because I value the level 4 and level 5 dual color cards very highly because those are your transitions.
Yeah,
So
but
that's just me personally. I value those insanely high, and I don't know if they're going to continue them, considering we just only have one of them,
yeah.
but they possibly could because of just how generic that base design is.
hmm That 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 to me screams like, because if it were like more themed, obviously black being like the blocker color kind of, um, it is a black Digimon, but it isn't like themed in a black way. Like I don't think
No,
I don't
it's
think it has blocker because it is black. I think it is just a blocker that happens to be black.
yeah, I would agree with that because nothing about its design really like says, "Hey, I should be the next black blocker." It's like,
Yeah,
no, it just seems like this is them testing the waters on
the next
a
cycle.
new approach to blockers.
Yeah, the next cycle and like the idea. Um, I'm I don't know what else I have to say about blockers. I know we haven't gone too far. Um, so I guess like we
Oh,
could just transition. Like, how has your playtesting been going? What do you think is better or worse than you thought it was?
so I currently have only a limited amount of BT7, so I can't exactly play everything that I want to play.
Hmm.
At least not with Tabletop Simulator. So I just came from locals earlier today, and I was just like, screw it. I'll just update Jesmon and I'll update Gabuban and see how they perform. And shocker, they perform relatively well still, just because they're very powerful decks and like that power still holds true. Like just because hybrids came out doesn't mean that those decks are dead or bad.
Hmm.
It just means that they have new tools to play with and they have to play a little bit differently because of the meta change and the lack of blockers and all of that stuff.
Yeah, I don't have a Gabuban built. I never took the time to learn it or play it or build it or anything, so I haven't had any experience with or against it yet in BT 7. But I did update my Jesmon build that I had. I just like, I guess I play solitaire matches occasionally, and I was using Jesmon as like the benchmark like deck to beat because it plays fairly like simply, right? Like there aren't as many decisions to be made, so it's easier for me to solitaire it as opposed to something like a Gabu Bond where do I swing? Do I tamer? Do I bond early? Do I bond late? There are a lot more decisions to be had, and there was a lot more ways for me to like knowing complete information minus I guess security um influence that. Whereas Jesmon was fairly straightforward. Like if I have the card, I play the card, and if I don't have the card, I kind of got to look for the card. Um,
Yeah, I think that's kind of like what a lot of decks are trying to do. Um, Take that like Jesmon approach where it's just like if I have it, I do. If I don't, I gotta dig it.
so
And I think like that's another shift in the meta on how a lot of these hybrid decks have been performing, and the ones that are performing relatively well are the ones that have an abundance amount of draw and or searching,
yeah,
or more digging
yeah.
specifically.
I guess well, searchers, I guess, is another like something like another um like as a requirement to become a good deck, you kind of need some method of searching. And your level of efficiency in your searching also kind of determines your consistency of your deck. I know
Yeah,
you've.
because
Oh, I'm sorry. Continue.
oh no, you're good. Yeah, because like taking starter deck one War Greymon as an example, that card can still punch for 5 security very easily. It just does it slower than Jesmon, which makes it less viable because it doesn't necessarily have all of those tools to be able to dig out its cards, play its cards efficiently, and be able to swing all in like the time it needs to. But
Hmm.
like again, it's still just a one punch deck at the end of the day, which is a lot of what red deck does, or red decks do. It's just the speed and consistency are two huge factors on what's making certain decks succeed and what decks are kind of fallen by the wayside.
Yeah, because I think the consistency and like the ability to search for your pieces is huge. I think that does kind of genuinely define like what is a meta deck and what isn't a meta deck at this point because like I know um you've at least disagreed with the um North American sentiment that the green red version of green hybrid is better and from my experience playing green red hybrid exclusively, I've seen pure green hybrids, but I've only played green red, and the um, inconsistency in its searching and variation in its searching is a little obnoxious.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I kind of like not necessarily disavowed it. Like I think it's a really fun and interesting deck when it goes off, but I would rather just be able to want to play my cards more efficiently rather than hope my things line up nicely just because I have alternative ways of searching. Like green still has its own levels of searching tools. You have Betamon, which helps you dig for level fours and tamers, which is really good. Then you have I always call it JP because it's what JP turns into more often than not, but
Beetlemon.
Beetlemon,
Yeah.
Beetlemon to search for your hybrids, just blanket generic hybrids, and your JP Tamer. So, like, looking at a lot of the red searchers, you'll only ever hit one target off of those red searchers just because, well, one, you're running hybrids, so that'll always be the thing you're searching for more often than not. And then the search off of the tamer is completely irrelevant. So it's like if you're going to be running a searcher, like it doesn't necessarily matter if it's red or green because most of the time you're only going to be hitting one Digimon. It's just the fact that I like having green Digimon as my searchers because I could use them for other things like evolution.
Yeah. Like I have my deck in front of me. I'm trying to look like so you've got like four, if not four, five different kinds of searchers.
Yeah,
Um,
because you got Flamon, Agumon as your like level threes, which two of them will only ever hit hybrids and that's it. That's all they
mhm.
can search for. And then Agumon, which is your tamer searcher, which you could just run Bokomon and boom.
Well,
Same difference.
I mean I run both, I guess, is the point. So, I
Yeah, I
can't
mean
run
there's
six
enough room
copies
for
of
both.
Bokomon. I can run two copies of Agumon and four copies of Bokomon. Um, Obviously Bokomon. I would run Bokomon before I'd run any of the other searchers, but so you run like
Bokomon's so good.
six different kinds of searchers that search for different amounts and different. Not only do they reveal different amounts, but they search for different things and they pull different quantities of those things. It is a very annoying deck to just like sit there and have to read all of my cards, and just building that initial familiarity of okay, this Flamemon pulls four, pulling these cards. This one pulls three, looking for different cards. Agumon pulls five, only looking for tamers. Beetlemon pulls five, looking for JP or hybrids. Like, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and I feel like people are kind of undervaluing the draw from evolution as an additional card to be playing around with because I was reading some comments on like Reddit threads and whatnot, and there was a thread where it was just like, yeah, you have more searchers with the red tools, and I'm like, okay, yeah, but you have evolution with your green tools. So like, if you're going to be making a play of let's just say a Flamon and a Flamon to try to dig twice
It's
the
just
green
replacing
version could
itself,
run,
yeah.
yeah, it's just replacing itself. Whereas the green version, you could, for less memory, mind you, play Madoki, search, digivolve into Beetlemon, search, and draw. So you're still getting the same amount of searches off of those two kinds of cards, and you're also gaining a draw from the evolution itself.
Mm.
So
I
like that's my like personal interpretation on why I like it, on top of the fact that you could actually use some good green inheritables and other good green Digimon to do various different things.
I think the big one is that so something that I don't have to deal with that I've seen teammates that I've played with have to deal with who actually play level 3 hybrids in their decks is that I never have to worry about my hybrids costing more than 2. It's just not a thing. You know, Metal Kabuteri evoing for 3 over a level 3 never matters because it's always 2 because it's only going over tamers.
I mean, yeah, there's a fair point to that, but like at the same time, like the only real reason you're running red is mostly because of Atomic Inferno and its
Yeah.
interaction with just any hybrids, just to be able to deal more damage. So like your ideal scenario is most of the time sitting on a red egg or a red Digimon on your field, getting all the way up into an ancient Beetlemon with piercing, its own ability to trash, and having security attack plus from the and boosted from the atomic inferno. Like that is usually your dream and best case scenario, and I really don't think that you need exactly the red searchers in order to accomplish that goal.
I think it's while annoying to learn, the variation in searching is helpful. Betamon only searching 3 feels worse when I've mentioned this before I think, but playing like Christmas hybrid, or uh,
Green.
I'm trying to think, because I refuse to use random names. Green red is never mind. Um, doesn't matter. But
You're trying to pull from Magic. It's Gruul.
yeah, Gruul, thank you. Gruul hybrids, but um, like the also just the green eggs are so bad. Like,
Uh, I actually have found Koromon to be a very useful egg. Granted, the context in which I was playing with it was in Eosmon, but I was using Green Low End with the hybrid package to go into Eosmon to try to give Eosmon piercing, and I actually found Koromon to be an insanely valuable card because it's helping me find the parts and pieces that I need and I'm looking for so I
curates your
can make
draws, yeah.
better. Yeah, it helps fix my draws and it helps fix my searches when I need it. And I think that's a huge value to green that a lot of people probably are overlooking.
Yeah. I mean, so it's not like I said, like also from my experience playing the black antibody list, like the idea that like as an example, when I play Dorumon is worse than Huckmon. You know, right? Like just total number of like successful hit targets and the amount of things that it searches. So while Huckmon and Dorumon both can pull two cards, Huckmon it can pull any Huck and any sister and any combination of those two, which is like the most versatile searcher I think we have. Whereas like Dorumon reveals three and can exclusively pull one X antibody and then one of the X antibody tamer Coda. That's it. So if I reveal three X antibodies, I draw one. If I reveal three Coda, I draw one. And that like strictness I think really it holds black back, besides the fact that black only has half of a package right now.
Right, and like what also is making blue excel is because not only that color just has an overabundance of card draw, it just also has as good of searching tools as red does, if not more,
Yeah.
which is the crazy part.
hmm like like it really um I feel like I've said it before. I don't know if I've said it today though, but um green Gruul hybrids is the first deck I've played where I've actually cared about what I've bottom decked, because there's a genuine chance I'll see it again, especially if the game goes late. I know you've played Gabu Bond and it went against security control, but I mean like in your standard like run of the mill matchup, I'll actually see it again, just because like what six different searchers, one two three four five six plus 12. Yeah, like almost half of my deck, if not more than half of my deck, is searchers.
Yeah,
That's
that's a lot of searchers.
crazy amount of consistency.
Yeah. And like don't get me wrong, I see the value in green red. I'm not saying it's bad or anything. It's just my personal preference leans towards the availability to be able to use my cards differently, giving me more options. So like yes, you do have more searchers, but I have more flexibility in how to use my cards and I can even put in more spicier tools and make more if I guess efficient in less efficient ways. Like those types of play lines.
Hmm.
But that's just me as a player. And like harping back onto like rigging your deck from the bottom up, like especially with the way Yellow Hybrids plays, that is a very real possibility. Like
hmm
I don't know if anyone's played against Yellow Hybrids, but that matchup is a grind.
Um, I was actually gonna mention that because I know you've like we kind of started this segment basically with like Jesmon and Gabu Bond are still good, and I think Jesmon and Gabu Bond again. I haven't really played with or against Gabu Bond yet, but I think Jesmon is worse. Actually, like I was actually surprised at how bad Justmon was into Yellow Hybrid.
It's probably just because the raw amount of heal that Yellow Hybrid
hmm
is really obnoxious, and once Jesmon starts fizzling out, there's just really nothing Jessamon can do. Like, you can only Jessamon so many times, and you can only gain so much initial value. And most of the time, you're just using that to create a push turn to kill them, or a bigger push turn on the follow up turn to try to kill them, and then after that, you just kind of fizzle and taper out. Especially if you can't like kill your sister mons or get them in the trash because they're hitting tamers and whatnot. Like, it could be a little bit of a harder matchup, but I don't necessarily think it's that bad. It's just the grinds that yellow has is like absolutely obnoxious.
So I have switched my Boogeyman deck from Jessamon to Yellow Hybrids as like the generic staple of like I want to see how this deck is like before I even bother building in paper, before I even bother doing anything else. Throw some like cards down, tabletop sim, play against myself versus Yellow Hybrid, and that's where I really found that like because the couple things that Yellow Hybrids does that really like kind of screws Jessamon is that it passively recovers as part of its like building its win condition. So it can like heal itself out of Jessamon range, like completely beyond Jessamon range, honestly. Like they can get to 7 security, like not counting, you know, um anything that adds back to security. I don't think they run Holy Wave or Tactical Retreat, but like,
No, they don't. They don't need to. Like,
yeah,
they just
just the
sit there
idea that
and
like,
recover all day and
but
just say
like,
like, "Are you done yet?"
cause and that's like, I know we mentioned before like how consistently that like yellow hybrids can get to like plus 9,000 security Digimon, but like also so like a standard run of the mill turn for them could be take Tamer I played previous turn, Evo for 2, Evo for 1, recover 1, Evo for 3, recover 1. That's, either Zephyrmon or Kazemon into Jet Sylphie into Seraphimon. They've now healed 2. So now they're at 7 in a turn from 5. And
On
that's
top of
almost
any other, yeah, on top of any other recovery that they could just have
but
naturally.
I mean I'm just saying like how easily the deck puts itself out of and how like quickly the deck puts itself out of Jessamon range. So 7 security you're out of OTK range almost completely. Like so Jessamon with with Greymon, with Savior, with a tie on board is still only 6, right? That's
Yeah, it's six.
so that's still even like Blitz Omni for game doesn't win that. Like
Yeah, you need like another piece in order to be
like a
able to get to
second
that Blitz
tie,
Omni state. Yeah,
but
like
like yeah, that's a
the
lot.
recovery is, yeah, the recovery is really obnoxious, and that's just what's making the deck so strong. Isn't like the fact that the deck actually is strong in of itself. Like, the deck actually just sits there and does nothing all game. It's just like, are you done with your turn? Cool. I'm just gonna slam a tamer past turns. Digivolve and heal past turn. Like,
Mhm.
most of the time, the deck isn't really doing anything. It's not actively engaging with the opponent. It's just saying, "Are you done yet?" And then just does its thing, and then just slowly amasses a board of tamers to gain a whole bunch of memory all in one turn to then start making really powerful plays happen. It's that point in which Yellow Hybrids excels at, and that's kind of what Shine Greymon did all the way back in 1.5, except this is more intrusive because of the more healing factors that the deck has to work with.
I found um the biggest like reasons why I've been losing to yellow hybrid even in these like very early like playtesting games have been because like you said, they kind of sit there and they don't do anything, but they also punish you for doing anything. In not necessarily exactly in the way security control used to or still technically does if anyone's still playing it, but the idea that um I found like a very a simple like line of events where you build your board, you push. It doesn't matter what deck you're playing or how much you're pushing for. If you don't win on that turn, you've now developed their tamer setup to the point where they've have like a presence, especially if you give them like a nice enough lineup of tamers, they could potentially be starting turn with like 5 or 6 memory. And
or, or more.
I know, because I actually found it happened, I think, 3 times in like out of like 9 games that I played. Like, and it was so funny because like the yellow deck was sitting there, not doing anything, just kind of like maybe like poking every once in like they would basically get to like promo Serafi or regular or BT1 Serafi and then like start swinging with that because why not? It's not going to do anything else. But even then, they hit the point where they start their turn with like 8 memory. They just digivolve over Serafi for 7 into Susano, foregoing completely the entire Susano hybrid whatever, and killing something, swinging for 3 checks, and then probably swinging with another hybrid or something for lethal. Like, it was just crazy how quickly they can win the game once they could just Evo into Susano without passing turn. Like,
Yeah, and Susanomon basically is, for all intents and purposes, their win condition, because that's the only way they could reliably not only A, kill a Digimon, but B, deal lots of damage all at once. And like just them digivolving into stacks, having their hybrids die due to reasons, like only feeds Susanomon to be able to use them off of hybrids if you really like off of your tamer as a hybrid, if you really wanted to. Because fun fact, Susanomon's not actually a hybrid. But I
mm-hmm,
digress. And yeah, like Susanomon is their win condition for the most part because they want to not attack for as long as they humanly possibly can to make their security lower than yours or to not lower your security because of TK and Kari.
mm-hmm.
Like they just want the value off of TK and Kari to be able to have one big push turn to have as much memory to do whatever they want with to win that turn.
The only thing that I did my initial rounds of testing and I was like, wow. Actually, before I move a little bit, so like the standard, like your Jesmon list without any changes, um, like it brings back to like the problems with inconsistency in searching. I don't think, while like it's definitely an auto include, like BT7 Huckmon's a bad card, unfortunately.
Um,
I
he did come up in some situations during my testing at locals where it actually was okay, but that's because I'm running the extra sister mods. So I think like
How many are you running?
he's
7, 8,
uh I'm running currently 3 Blanc, 2 Blanc Awakened, and 3 CL. So
8.
that's a total of 8.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it was a little bit helpful because there was a turn where I didn't have a Sistermon and it was able to pull out the Sistermon from my Justmon. So it's not like it's awful. It's just not necessarily the greatest in the world because there was a turn where I put back a Savior and a Jesmon off of that search while trying to dig out those cards because I needed to Evo and try to swing and put some pressure onto the opponent. So
Because
it definitely is not that great, but depending on your build, it could be okay.
I mean, we never lived in a world where Jesmon was like that scary of a deck, like where it was just winning every tournament and everything. But like I feel
I
like
honestly think, yeah, I honestly think that, not to cut you off,
you're
but
good.
I think Jesmon, um, people just were building it wrong and they were still trying to build it super greedy, and you kind of have to build it more traditional. Like, you cannot just run 4 saviors and call it a day. You
I was
you
running
just cannot.
6. I'm running 6. I think 6 is fairly standard. Like 8,
6 is definitely in the sweet spot. 7 is probably okay. 8 is with 4 or 5 level 5s, you just don't need 8.
I've just like 8 or 9 depending on the deck has always been my ratio for fives. But in Jesmon, because you are a one turn kill deck, a one stack kill deck, your goal being just to I only need to see one level 5 per game. Just like I only need to see one level 6 per game, so why should I run any more 5s than I do 6s? So
Right.
I run just a slightly higher amount just because um at least I can get the draw from it, potentially using that draw to see the 6. As you mentioned, like the drawing is a somewhat like a passive level of consistency, but the problem with the Huckmon is that like I've never been in a position, even prior to now or now, where like Like we went over like the pieces required of like the Jesmon OTK. Like you need to see any level or any level 3, then security or starter deck Greymon, then Savior, then those are the pieces that are hard to find. Like specifically like starter deck Greymon because it's almost completely unsearchable by current means besides red memory boost. And but Huckmon searches for none of those pieces. I've never been in a position where, oh man, if only I had some, because it's either in your hand or on the in the trash. It's so versatile.
Right. And like I was like doing some hard thinking about the Awakens, and like there's a reason why in BT like 8 and beyond that they started cutting the Awakens, and it's just because like you're too Sistermon dependent when you don't want to be Sistermon dependent. You want the Sistermons to support the Huckmon and the Jesmon cards, but like the Sistermon Awakens don't really do much of anything themselves. Like they don't have a passive ability for them to just chill on the field to gain some benefits. Like they have some good on play abilities, don't get me wrong. Blanc's ability to just recover is really good, but it does require another Blanc to interact with to get that ability off. And you're mostly just using it for the on delete ability to try to recycle your pieces because, as I mentioned before, once Jesmon kind of fizzles out, he kind of just doesn't really do anything. He lost all of his steam.
hmm I would say Jesmon still benefits from leaning into its strengths, so I've found the on deletion ability to be less than useful for like as you mentioned, like it isn't dying to security as often as it used to. It's just tripping tamers, which is setting you further behind. And two, like I don't have any Jesmons in my trash because I don't have anything in my trash because I'm not playing anything out. You know, if I'm at the point where I've swung with Jesmon, I've either won or lost.
Yeah, and I think like the format is starting to see a small trend where we're using less level sixes and some more aggressive level fives. Like I've been playing around with some aggro level fives, and they are scary. Like in red hybrids, an Aldemon swinging for like 11k 3 checks is terrifying.
hmm
Technically, it would be 13 at that point because yeah, Takuya gives it plus 2,000, and then if it has over 10,000, security attack plus one. So like you're starting to see level fives that are acting like level sixes, and I think that's another huge trend that I'm starting to see. So like even in uh blue hybrids as an example, like they only run most of the time for Magnas, and they'll hardly ever use the Magnas because most of the time they're just using Beowulf to start swinging, adding cards back to your hand, so then you could reuse those hybrids that you just add back to your hand to apply more pressure with.
Yeah, I know we mentioned about it before we started, but yeah, one of our teammates basically runs like a champion rush blue hybrid deck, and while he technically runs the um the level 6, I never saw it today in our entire like 3 or 4 different best of threes. Like he never needed it. He either lost before he saw it or won before he saw it, or needed to because its Digivolution condition is so restrictive.
Yeah, like it's a good card, don't get me wrong. I think it's really good against yellow hybrids just because you need it to apply lots of pressure. Um, but yeah, against other decks, you could just champion out and be totally okay, which is crazy. Um, but like going back to like tournament viability, like I actually think if we see a massive influx on yellow hybrids, like as just that is the deck everyone's playing, that's the deck everyone's afraid of. Tournaments are actually going to be very interesting and awkward because you're going to have a lot more people going into time and going into turns and ending in draws because of how slow and passive yellow hybrids is versus the other hybrid decks.
Yeah. Um, I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing. Um, obviously
Oh no,
everyone.
it's not. It's like, oh, you really have to understand that matchup. Otherwise, you're probably gonna not do very well in the tournament because, like, yeah, you could stall the opponent out, but like sometimes ties can actually count as losses or worse than losses at times.
hmm Yeah. Um, what I was mostly gonna say though was like the idea that like this isn't necessarily new. Like we've had decks that are more controlly in nature that like mirror free, like I guess BT5, right? Like we had Lord Nightmon, the chicken raising meta, and there were a lot of Lord Nightmon mirrors, and I do remember a lot of Lord Nightmon mirrors that I've played because I did play Lord Nightmon for most of the format, except for like the portion of the format that the rest of the world never got. Um, and um, a lot of times those they would run late because neither player wants to make a move because only once you give them a target to make plays with can and it's just like yeah the just the entire idea that you're punished for going first, I guess. So um
Or
these yellow
making the first threatening action.
yeah and yellow hybrid is kind of the same thing. The first time you take your tamer and you turn it into something that can then die or something that then isn't a tamer passively gaining you resources. Um, you're now, you know, behind in so to speak. But
Well, Yellow Hybrids doesn't care about that. Yellow Hybrids literally does nothing because it doesn't have to do anything. It's just like that's kind of what's making Yellow Hybrids a little bit worse in that aspect compared to the Lord Knight mirrors, where they could run late just because they're afraid of chicken, whereas Yellow Hybrids just do not care. Period. They do not want to attack because they don't need to attack. And the second they start attacking is usually when they want to win the game, and they're actually expecting you to be hitting their security to try to actually, you know, have them, the opponent, try to win the game, or give them that false sense of illusion where they could, because they could just recover and pretend like nothing even happened.
well, that's what I mean. Like, so I guess like while this is the closest we're gonna get, hopefully, to like an actual like security control meta, because they're playing a lot more like security control, where they're just they win by you hitting them. So if you just don't hit them, but I guess that's the big difference though, is that unlike security control, whereas like while they did have holy waves and like magna angemons, these people are the yellow hybrids isn't slamming 7 mana down and recovering one. They're paying, I guess, a net total of 6 and recovering twice. Um, and at the end of the
Right, or just passively playing tamers
yeah,
just to build up their win con because they don't have to do anything.
and while you don't lose as much to their security, it's not killing your opponent, your Digimon as much. You're still advancing their game state. Like we mentioned, how, you know, if you push into them too much, all of a sudden they're starting their turn with 7 or 8 memory.
Yeah,
And
and then
that's the
that's
real
playing into
danger.
yellow.
That's the real
Yeah,
danger.
that's playing to their strengths where it's just like, okay, I have lots of memory. Now I can start making more powerful plays than you, and now I'm outpacing you.
That's yeah. So like I think that's why the yellow hybrids mirror is as obnoxious as it is, I guess, because neither player wants to hit the other player. Like not just like the security control mirror where I don't want my thing to die. It's I don't want to give you a tamer. I don't want to give you a TK. I don't want to put you at a point where you're at 4 security and I'm at 5, and I flip you a TK and Kari, giving you another 2 memory. You know?
Right. And like if the yellow hybrid deck is like a really smart deck, they'll obviously know when to hybrid, which puts threats and bodies onto the field, which then allows you to actually try to interact and react to what they're trying to do. So that's another really skillful thing, is like, when do I actually need to start doing things versus me not caring?
So yeah, I don't really know how that's gonna get navigated, but I do know that I think we'll see like um, I guess a progression. Like you basically you start with your template like yellow hybrid, and I think the more standard versions at this point are running purple eggs with purple Gazimon and like Schwartz Lazarts, only because it gives them like true board wipes and a very easy access board wipes. Um, but I think we see them move beyond that, basically to win the mirrors more often than not.
Yeah, like they could easily Tekken Lucimon, both purple Lucimon and yellow Lucimon, just for some additional heal and to try to poke at the opponent's tamers for having lots of memory and for literally waiting long enough to fill up the trash. Um, so like that's something they could do. There's just a lot that they can do because yellow is another very high synergy and flexible color. They even have some really good control type tools, so they could start teching in something like Kazuchimon to again try to heal them when they're low and punch them really hard when they're high.
Hmm. So, like, when you mentioned the level 5 thickens, and I thought about it, like, so maybe we're going about this the wrong way. Like,
Yeah, that's why I kind of like aggro level fives, is because it's less of an investment for you to put into a card to have sometimes the same result as a level six. So that's why I think like red hybrids is seeing lots of popularity because it is that proposed counter to yellow hybrids, where it's just like, oh, I could Takuya, build up an insane stack with Takuya, and then go into ancient off of just digivolving cheaply and efficiently on my hybrids, and then just swinging for basically all of their security all at once.
hmm
Because Takuyo put what, 5 cards under? So that's already 6 checks off of the Ancient, on top of the 2 that you need additionally to get up into Ancient. So that Ancient can swing for like 7, 8 checks, which is going to be a lot of damage to go through.
I was just
And
thinking,
then
like, more
and
along
then it
the
also
lines of
has
like level
Idamon.
5s. So, like,
Yeah, and
you're
then
good.
Alderman, like, yeah,
Yeah.
just going back to Alderman, swinging for like 2, 3 checks as a level 5 is insane. It's just really, really strong, especially boosted. It could put in a lot of work.
hmm So, like, just enable. So, like, one of the things I really do like about the Black X Antibody deck is that it lets you, like, operate, I guess, like a turn faster than most decks because I don't need to raise my level 5, digivolve into my level 6, and then do something. I have the ability to raise my level 4, digivolve my level 5, tucking an X antibody source, and giving it that pseudostasis for a turn against everything but blue. Um, and I think that's really relevant because that does give you that, like, next turn I can hatch an egg and I can raise one turn sooner essentially, and like that gives you like that small tempo advantage. Um, so something like that, like in Jesmon, I'm sitting here thinking about it now. Savior's already 7k, so if you tune your deck more, what the hell's the other one? Not Blanc, but CL,
CL.
more
Yeah.
CL based instead of Blanc based, you could then raise your four, raise starter deck Greymon essentially, um, Evo into Savior, playing a Sistermon, preferably a CL, and then swinging for 9. You know, like yellow hybrids don't really have a way to punish that necessarily beyond specifically Schwartz or um, just getting advantage from whatever you hit. But
Yeah, and that's probably why Yellow is playing Purple and Schwartz to try to de-incentivize that type of play. But like even just against other decks, like just taking Yellow hybrids out of the equation, against other decks, that's still just a very strong turn to do. Like I was playing against red hybrids as an example with my Jesmon deck, and I raised a uh metal Growlmon,
mhm,
and I swung at his security for 9k security attack +1, deleting his Bokomon. And that
mhm,
was a huge power turn that he had very little to respond with.
mm.
Because he just literally had tamers and the Bokomon on the field. So I'm just like, oh, this is pretty safe and free.
So hear me out. I don't know if I'm stretching here. I don't know if I'm high on my own copium or not, but if we're defining meta decks by their in-line searching capabilities, what do you think about Shoutmon?
Shoutmon is always going to be in an interesting space just because he does have that like OTK potential because he could literally stack multiple security tech pluses in his sources. and he could evo on top of himself into more sources to do more interesting things. Like, I don't think Shoutmon is a deck that's like bad per se. It's just, again, it doesn't necessarily have a lot of the tools it needs to perform as quickly as something like a Jesmon. But I don't think it's a bad deck. My brother plays that deck. He loves that deck. But like, it is slower than a Jesmon, and sometimes it doesn't hit as
Why?
hard.
What makes it
Why?
slower? I'm just sitting here reading the
Um,
cards. What makes it slower?
so what makes it slower is
It gets blitz.
it,
It can
it needs a
literally
little bit more
swing.
setup.
It can swing a turn
It
faster.
it could, yes, it could swing a turn faster, but it needs more setup because you need to see, or you want to see, specific cards in your hand, and some of them aren't necessarily searchable.
Which like started at Greymon. That's that it.
Starter deck Greymon and Voltramon
You don't
aren't
need
searchable,
Voltramon.
and well, I mean,
You have Omni
Voltramon's
Shell.
your other level 5.
Yeah, I know, but you don't need it.
I mean,
It's
if you tuck a Voltramon off of a whiffed Shoutmon, you're gonna feel very bad, especially if you needed that level 5. Like, it's still the fact that it doesn't have the greatest of searching tools and the greatest of drawing tools either. Still kind of puts it a little bit of a leg down below certain other red decks. Like, it's still a good red deck, don't get me wrong. It's just not the best red deck, and it's still powerful, but it does need specific setup to do well.
well, so just comparison of searching here. So, um, both reveal five. Both the BT5 Shoutmon and Huckmon reveal five. Both pull two, but Shoutmon can pull any Shoutmon and a Blitz.
Yeah,
So,
the problem is also you can't search for any of your level 4s. Their level 4 slot is completely unsearchable, and the level 4 slot also has really bad inheritables that most of the time it's just super hard to use because the only one you want to see is starter deck Greymon. Um,
mm,
but the other big problem to Shoutmon is the fact that he also doesn't have good ways at DP boosting himself. So
does
a
that matter in
Shoutmon
this
most
format though?
it still does. It mattered in a lot of the previous formats because my brother would swing with a 12k Shoutmon for like 4 or 5 checks, and then it dies on the first or second check, and then it's just
Yeah,
like, oh, now I actually have 0 to work with because I'm a big stack deck and I put all my time and effort into that one stack. So
that's
that's what
fair.
also makes Shoutmon pretty bad is because its fizzle potential is way higher than Jesmon's. So like if your Jesmon dies, okay, cool, you should still at least have some Sistermons on the field to do something with.
Hmm.
Shoutmon, nothing. Absolutely nothing.
That's fair. So, like the level four thing, I think is pretty relevant because at least even if it's not ideal, Justmon at least can search Bao Huckmon out and use it. If there's yeah, there's no level four Shoutmon to be searched, which is a little bit of a feels bad. Um, the DP thing kind of matters mostly, I guess, because of the Zoe thing we mentioned before. How like uh they can have like decently large security Digimon in yellow hybrid. So
Well, also just getting over some of the opponent's level 6s in security would be a little bit difficult if it's not boosted. So like right now my brother's Shoutmon lineup is for his level 4s is he's using starter deck Growlmon because of the gaining a memory for killing the opponent's Digimon,
hmm,
which Shoutmon can very easily do.
yeah,
Um, Starter deck Greymon because, security attack +1 is just how red wins.
hmm,
And then he's running 2 Agunimon because, hybrid for game after all of their security is broken.
yep,
And then 2 BT1 Greymon. That just
okay,
generically gives plus 2000 because that's one of the best level 4 inheritables that Red has to use generically for a Shoutmon deck.
hmm, okay. That does make sense. So the level four thing I hadn't noticed. It's just like immediately looking at it, just because following the line of thinking we were discussing, like why not just run Shoutmon and then I can swing with level 5 Blitz and then swing with level 6 Blitz and I don't care how much you choke me. I'm swinging anyway, you know?
Right, and that's why like a lot of Shoutmon decks teched in BT5 Agumon is because you still run a couple of Greymons that you could try to search out, and you're still running an Omnimon. So like there's a good amount of searching that the deck can still do. It's just a little bit more awkward and cumbersome, and it's kind of actually counterintuitive to what Shoutmon wants to do because Shoutmon cares very much about its inheritables.
Hmm.
Very much so.
I tried running that in Jesmon initially, and I found it to be really bad.
It's better in Shoutmon, but it's not like the most ideal thing in the world because again, Shoutmon cares about its inheritables and a lack of inheritable on a level 3 that isn't going to do anything is still kind of suboptimal.
Hmm. Um,
But that just goes to show you, like, other decks, older decks can still perform relatively well, and tech and tuned correctly, especially with a deck loyalist, can put in a lot of work if played correctly and tuned finely.
hmm I'm I wouldn't be surprised if something that we've completely ignored or forgotten like comes up. So like I don't remember. Did you even talk about Diaboromon in your tier list?
No, because Diaboromon, the only new tool that he got is Grumblemon, and he's still not that great. Like, he gets better, or at least he got better with Classic,
Hmm.
and he has lots of very powerful tools for you to tune him to handle various different metas. But it's just the fact that he is more of a niche deck at this point because a lot of the attention is going to be on the hybrid hype, which is why I
Mm,
left him out of my tier list. Is like he's still technically meta playable. It's just I don't necessarily see a lot. I'm expecting to see way less of him than anything I put on my tier list.
yeah. It depends on like I guess your tier list philosophy. Like the idea being that like cuz I think there's going to be um more Diaboromon played than some of the decks that you've mentioned, but that doesn't like I guess it's play rate versus win rate, I guess. Like, like I feel like some of the decks you mentioned are like that you listed as rogue could potentially be seen as like casual by your metrics, and then some decks that you didn't mention at all could be seen as rogue by your metric. Like it's pretty versatile, I guess. It's hard to really pin down because there aren't any like hard numbers tied to any of it. It's a lot of feels.
Right, and that's kind of why like I developed the list the way I did is because like I just don't exactly know. Like and I think I made like a
Well,
giant
nobody knows
asterisk.
really,
Yeah, like
technically.
I that's why I said like in the title it's a prediction.
Hmm.
Um and I even mentioned in the video like just because something I could have labeled as casual because I didn't mention it doesn't necessarily mean it also isn't rogue. Like there's a little bit of a crossover between that.
Yeah, like I I don't know, like I guess I'm actually really interested in going trying to dig up some lists or come up with decks that like aren't necessarily discussed or talked about, like more rogue than even like the rogue that we all know of. Like I don't think anyone would be surprised if I rolled up to locals with like a Lord Nightmon deck. They'd be like, "Oh yeah, Lord Nightmon," like that's still a thing. But like Diaboromon or like Black Toolbox, like with the Black Metal Garurumon still, like I think trashing security is still very valuable in this format. So,
No, it 100% is. Like if yellow hybrids is the deck to beat theoretically, like there's a lot of interesting things that we could build and play around with to try to beat that out. Diaboromon, I personally think has a really good matchup on yellow hybrids just because you're spawning extra level 6 bodies. You don't
hmm.
care if they live or die, you just care
And
about
Schwartz
like
can't touch them.
yeah,
That's
you
only
just
wide board wipe they have. I guess
right
if they're
and
running Shine, but the few of them I think are running Shine, or they're going to switch off of Shine, because I think Shine is a mistake in the mirror, which is what they're going to be teching for.
right, and then like Diaboromon, as I mentioned before, has lots of tech and tools to handle various different things. So it's just like, okay, if maybe the extra token spawner is bad, well, now we have the card that basically could have pseudo jamming, where you could swing, create a token, and then live through that security check, even if he were to die by sacrificing a token. Then we also have anti-removal in the form of decoy. We have rush. We have lots of draw, lots of memory gain, lots of searching. Like there's a lot of things that Diaboromon can do that would make yellow hybrids kind of cry. But like the thing about the meta is like how does Diaboromon handle those aggro decks? How does Diaboromon handle some of the other hybrid decks that are playing more aggressively and faster, or even a mid-range style? Like, how does it fare against some of those? And that's the real testament is like, yes, it could have a good yellow hybrids matchup, but it might just lose to literally everything else because it's still too slow.
Hmm.
So that's the give and take of like what a meta is just like
Yeah.
you might be good against something but bad against another, and you can't necessarily prevent or prepare for that.
I haven't I never even really built Diaboromon. I just was like keeping tabs on it just because I have been playing black since just the tail end of BT5. But um I'm actually really curious because I know when we were talking about Nats, how Diaboromon was seen as the like not solution because it still only did well minimally, but like the best deck into Gabu Bond that wasn't Gabu Bond. Besides security
Yeah,
control, I guess.
yeah, and that sentiment is still kind of true. Like, it can still do very well against a lot of the other top decks. It's just nobody really is playing it because it's still a little bit harder to use and not super straightforward on what you need to prioritize, not only from a deck building perspective, but from a playline perspective, because you need to evaluate what stacks you are going to need to see and try to form on top of what your opponent is trying to do and how you can try to counteract that. So it is not the easiest deck to play, and I'm not calling a lot of players lazy, but like sometimes they just don't want to put that level of effort in, and it's just easier to play, oh, I'm just going to play red hybrids because it's easier and it has a good win rate against literally everything.
I would never say that like someone who doesn't want to learn a like lower tiered or lower priority meta deck lazy. Because like my mentality has always been, or my philosophy is that like there are people out there that will get really good at like niche characters in games or like decks in card games that are like I'm like the best, green gotcha player, or I'm the best Diaboromon player. And like maybe you are really good and you've teched your deck and you've really tested it and you've really nailed down those lines of play that win you games where otherwise like a less skilled pilot wouldn't. But taking that same amount of effort and dedication and applying it to a higher tier deck would give you significantly more success, which is why like I guess is always my argument, you know?
Yeah, and like I'm not trying to call people lazy. It just is more effort into something you care about, and like I'm not dissuading anyone from doing it. It's just the majority of what card game players want is an easy cheap win, and they'll take any situation or any deck that can do that and, just play that instead.
I would even go as far as to say cheap win in the other sense of because I'm still looking at it, and what's held me back from building Diaboromon is the $50 tournament promo.
So, like, the funny thing is, you don't need the $50 tournament promo to play the deck. You could build it just fine without it. It really just depends on your skill, not only as a pilot to navigate the play lines without its inclusion, but the deck building philosophies you have to incorporate without its inclusion also. Like, I only have one copy of that card, and I actually really don't see a need to play it because I built my deck to do something very similar with it with the BT5 Diaboromon and just try to abuse token spamming in Rush.
Yeah, especially though like the idea that like you kind of need to blow out the stack in one turn. Is there a way to get both? There is, isn't there? Like you could have the big
Yeah, so
punchy and the like shitting tokens,
um
or is it what are the
I'd
other?
have to I
I'm
have
looking
to
at them.
reread yeah, I have to reread Kursarimon because like this is where Kursarimon is the most important slot in the entire Diaboromon line because it just does the most work.
So there is
Uh,
EX1 Kurisarimon when another one of your other Digimon with the same name as this is deleted. Unsuspend this Digimon.
Yeah, so that's the card that you want to play with the Security Tech Plus, just
Hmm.
because you can spawn the token from the errata. swing, delete the token, or when the token gets deleted, just passively, then you could restand it and swing again for lots of
Hmm.
additional security. But the
BT5 Kurosarimon's the one that gives rush.
yeah, so all your other Digimon with the same name as this one gain Rush.
Hmm.
So I'm trying to decipher like if the Digimon itself, like on play, almost gains Rush,
Yeah,
because if it does, then
it
you just
does.
use that Kurisarimon with the Security Attack +1 Diaboromon to basically swing with the Diaboromon first after spawning the tokens with the Kurosari underneath it, and then you just hit the security as hard as you can and swing out with the tokens. So that's usually the most ideal way to use it.
Well, also, like, I'm thinking about Diaboromon because I'm also just trying to think of, like, the way that the yellow hybrid plays the game, I think benefits, like, Diaboromon in a way. Because if Diaboromon was already quick enough, I say quick, like, the way that Diaboromon, like, established its board, uh, was good enough to, like, stop or at least, like, halt Gabubond in its aggression. Like, it's the polar opposite is yellow hybrid.
Yeah, like
I'm actually really
I
interested to build Diaboromon now. Um,
it's a lot of fun, but I think because Diaboromon needs a lot more setup to perform very well, that's what also gives it a good matchup into yellow hybrids is because
you
it
have plenty of
has
time. You have all the time.
yeah, you have literally almost all of the time to do whatever you need because they're not going to swing at you.
Hmm.
The only thing you're worried about is basically when you see your erratas and how many erratas you see. That's the only thing you're actually worried about because you already know
Well,
that
you
you're
search for
just
them too.
yeah,
Again,
you could
like,
search for them, but if any are in your security, then that's not gonna happen.
eh, they'll chip against yellow hybrids. I think chips against yellow non-yellow hybrids. There's no reason
No,
not to.
they don't really chip because they want TK and Kari to be
Well,
online.
they can have
So
TK and
they
Kari online without having, like, they can just chip you to four. Like I'm not saying they're gonna chip you to one, but
no, like they still can chip, yes, but they won't chip very often. Like most of the time they'll go for one or two checks depending on what type of deck you are playing against them.
and again, like I guess tying back to one of our like major talking points, like you know, consistency of searching. Caramon BT5, reveal 5, add an unidentified, add an errata. That's pretty versatile.
Yeah,
That's
but that's like the only searching it has outside of just trying to get into a Diaboromon deck and draw a butt ton of cards, because the
it's
deck can do
something.
that.
It's better than Black Antibody has. It's better
Uh,
than um frickin' I guess not blue hybrids, but it's like better than red hybrids. No, not even. The
like
hybrids
it's
all have
its
a
only
lot of
searcher.
searching, but only
Yeah,
a lot
like the
of
hybrids have a butt ton of searching.
most decks only have one searcher though. The hybrids are the exception, especially because they all
Yeah,
have Pokemon too.
yeah, and that's kind of what makes the hybrids excel is just their sheer amount of searching and setup because like having tamers means they're basically uninteractable Digimon while having additional benefits for just literally sitting on the field.
Hmm.
And then just the sheer amount of searching that they have with some of their tools makes them really good. Granted, not all of the hybrid decks have this. Um, Purple hybrids is the perfect example of like a bad hybrid deck. Like it just literally doesn't do anything. And that's part of like with what hybrids are trying to do is like they don't really have a clear way to want to try to win the game. Like you could try building it Cherubimon, but Cherubimon itself doesn't have enough damage to like do much of anything. And then you're gonna have to start teching in yellow eggs to gain some rush off of Bushi Agumon. So like it's just a lot more awkward to play because the tools aren't as efficient or powerful as the other colors.
What do you mean purple hybrids doesn't have any searchers? Wendigomon trashes 5 tamers. That's fantastic.
No, I mean Black Hybrids is non-existent.
I mean,
So like
Wendigo purple
I'm not even
hybrids.
yeah, I'm not counting Black Hybrids as the worst because Black Hybrids just doesn't exist.
I said purple. That's what I mean. Like
Yeah, I know.
black hybrids
With
doesn't
purple,
count.
it's like no, it doesn't. But like you're not using. Okay, so like you're not using Wendigomon when you could just play the hybrids, like and Eismon. Like that's just not happening. Eismon, or Eismon Scatter Mode more
Hmm.
specifically. That's like Purple's best card, coming out of BT7, which is sad and not sad. I don't know. I'm mixed.
Well, you would need to run Wendigo mod, unfortunately. Like,
No, you don't. Trust me. You do not need to run Wendigomon. That card is awful.
well, what the hell is Renamon doing or Rihihimon? If you're playing
Rahihimon?
repulling, if how else are you playing Purple Tamers from your trash if you're not throwing them there with Wendigomon?
Uh, Eismon. Scatter Mode. Draw three, discard
Oh,
two. Yeah, draw three,
oh,
discard two is way better than trying to dig and set up only your tamers.
man. It seems as though this card is limiting, design space and potentially should be taken care of.
Uh, well, I mean, Eismon's hit for completely different reasons,
Yeah.
but
The amount of
like
times I could have Jogrissed while playing Titamon is hilarious. I keep making the joke. I'm like, and now I Jogress.
yeah, and then the other thing with purple hybrids is they actually have some cheeky combos to essentially have almost infinite value.
Mm,
So like you have what's its face? Um I'm blanking. Kaiser Leomon or Kaiser Loemon, whatever translation you prefer to
yep,
look at. I'm just gonna call him Kaiser Leomon.
that works.
Um, yeah. So like Kaiser Leomon,
Retaliation.
the retaliation is nice, and then you could use it in combination with something like Nemon, where it's just like he dies, Nemon plays the tamer underneath him, which would probably be a mat, and then the mat would add the Kaiser Leomon back to your hand to be able to reuse off of your mat again to basically kind of get this like infinite loop of value. It's a slow infinite, but if Nemon sticks on the field and you're able to do it multiple times, it is still there.
Mm.
But like again, Purple Hybrids just doesn't have the damage output of the other decks in order to really compete as a top tier hybrid deck. Is the bottom line on why Purple Hybrids is not positioned so highly.
I'm very interested in Cherubi Pinata as well. It seems like a fun deck.
Well, like I said, because purple doesn't have a high damage output, you need to figure out alternate ways too. And like Cherubimon to Resbushi Agumons is like one of the only ways that you have outside of just Titamon swinging for lots of security. Like
Hmm.
that's borderline it.
And so I tweaked my Titamon list a little bit, and then I played more today. Um, so, ah, man, we really don't even like a lot of time. But because I was gonna say that like blue hybrid being the gatekeeper, because a lot of the decks I'm playing aren't hybrid decks. At least now, because I feel like uh I want to do more testing with non-hybrid lists, and like playing into blue hybrids, constantly just removing my sources that I work so hard to care about is a little obnoxious.
I mean, that's just the strength of blue. It's like that's why the Tommy line is so good, is because without Ice Wall, Blue also needs to think about how it can use its tools, its other tools that it has defensively, and just stun locking the opponent's Digimon is like insanely valuable. Like just taking away attacks is like really valuable when you're an aggressive style of deck.
Not even just
Um,
that, like I feel like just the existence of the blue hybrid matchup completely removes my ability to play purple Titamon, because I don't like it, just like Lilith Loop, but in a worse fashion, I guess. I don't win the turn that I, Tita things unless I have like, a ridiculous hand of like demonic disasters and stuff like that in Izmon. But even then, like I can swing for 4 or 5 security fairly consistently, and then I pass turn, they strip my sources and I cry. And or I was playing, the updated Kaiser Nail Machine Dramon list, and I spent all that time building these nice Machine Dramon stacks that get stripped in 2 turns.
yeah, no, I get it. Like that's kind of why, yeah, like you said, blue is like the gatekeeper, where it's just like if you blue is just a very strong color just because of the interactions it has that are unique to blue, which is why I kind of like blue in a nutshell and why I generally consider myself to be more of blue Savvy or Blue Advid, just because I find it to be a really fun and interesting way to play the game.
Yeah. I don't really want to go anywhere too far more because I know we're running out of time. I guess the last thing I wanted to say is that like I managed to um at least surprise my locals um because I did do fairly well with my Black X antibody list I brought, the Black Zubagon list. I lost my first match against the eventual winner, but I took him to game 3 and like his exact words were like, "This deck wasn't on my radar. I have not play tested against this deck at all because I thought it was really bad. You've just proven that I at least need to like understand the matchup a little bit."
Yeah, Zubagon Punch is just a good card in general, and the fact that the X antibody cards for right now just make it easier to use just is super valuable.
Like he's like, "You swing for how many checks at what DP?" And it can't be
Uh,
deleted.
yeah, it'll be 19 checks, or 19 checks,
Yeah. For
19K, 3 checks, and yeah, good luck.
and it can't be deleted.
Yeah,
Oh, it was funny. Like as I
yeah,
like I think it was literally game 1 I actually just got like the equivalent of the Jessamon hand. I went up my stack, I swung, I tucked another Doru Gray, and I had a Coda out with a Zubagon. So that's one, two, three, 4 checks at I believe 19k. Yeah,
yeah,
four
four
checks at
checks,
19
19.
on I think turn 3 or 4. But you know,
Yeah, with a blocker reboot,
hmm yeah,
already on the field that it can't be deleted. Yeah, no,
blocker
it's
reboot. Yeah,
it's
one more memory, and in that same lineup, I also have like Grumble for game. Like
yeah.
it's the deck does things, but like it's basically it's a car with 3 wheels right now. uh,
Yeah, no, I get it.
so
But that's just the fun of the format is experimenting, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, doing lots of play testing, just because we are, for the most part, in an unknown for one of the more truer times in the English format. Like we've had BT4 where it's just like, okay, this is another unknown. We have promos earlier than Japan, and we had restrictions already in place where Japan didn't. So like this is more of an in the dark just because there's more possibilities of good decks to play with, on top of the fact that we still, in our format, have promos that Japan still has yet had. I don't think they're going to make much of a difference, but it's still a factor, on top of the ban and restrictions being a huge factor as well.
hmm yeah. Um, so I don't really have anything else to add. Um, so final thoughts on blockers and searchers, I guess, are but the two primary topics we really went over.
Yeah, outside of just general meta talk,
hmm
I think searchers are hugely important. We see that even in future sets, if you bother to look ahead, they're using searchers more and more. I think these digging tools just help make decks more consistent, and they're putting it on the rookie slots and level 4 slots just because they want to have you try to actually use those cards more efficiently rather than just be like, oh, I'm going to just Digivolve it in Raising, then Digivolve into level 4 and pass. You have more interesting lines of play that you could possibly think about while increasing the overall consistency of your deck. And then blockers, they're just fading out because I don't want to say that they're outdated. It's just we have more tools to be dealing with and more cards we would rather be playing with.
Yeah. Outdated, I guess, would be like wrong, kind of, like because blockers still exist. It's more so that advancing your own game state is more likely to result in you winning than slowing down your opponent's game state.
Right, and some dude at my locals, um, actually, I think it was my brother that said it, where it's just like, why would I waste my time not losing the game when I could use that same time winning the game?
hmm Yeah. There's still a lot of interactivity to be had in this game. Like we're definitely not moving like too far away from like actual interaction, but um, leaving the swings up to like uh security as well as just like removing the threats before they have the capability of swinging, because a lot of decks aren't swinging at like the 3 and 4 level anymore. um, I guess just means more.
Right, and there's just so much variance and different ways to play the same deck that like it's kind of hard to just um just tie it up into say this is just what it is when there's just multiple different variants that could be played.
Okay.
So it's also harder to figure out what to play against when you don't exactly know what variant you're already playing against.
I believe that covers it. So this has been the Wolf Den podcast. I hope you enjoyed listening. Goodbye.
Have a good night or day whenever you're listening to us.